Welcome to our channel. This is an era filled with countless doomsday prophecies, but are there any actual apocalyptic events? Today, we will share the story of one of the most famous prophets from mid-20th century America. In 1956, the popular American news magazine, Parade, released its second issue of May. The article stated that 4 years later, the president would be a Democrat who would die in office. Assassinated. In 1960, Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy became the 35th President of the United States. 3 years later, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The person who wrote the article was Jeane Dixon. She was well aware of Kennedy's assassination and wanted to prevent it, but she was powerless. In the weeks leading up to Kennedy's death, Jeane became increasingly anxious. She approached a close friend of the president named Harry and asked him to persuade the president to change his itinerary. However, Harry felt that the request was too abrupt and difficult to express, so he brushed Jeane off with a few words. On the morning of Kennedy's assassination, Jeane told her friends that today, precisely today, the president would be assassinated. At noon, the news of Kennedy's assassination shocked everyone. Jeane Dixon was one of the most famous prophets of 20th century America. But where did her prophetic abilities come from? In 1904, Jeane was born in Wisconsin. Her father was a prosperous lumber merchant, and she was the youngest daughter in the family. When Jeane was 5 years old, one day she asked her mother if she could play with a letter she saw in the mailbox, which had a black border. Her mother opened the mailbox and found it empty, thinking it was just a child's whimsical idea and didn't pay much attention to it. However, 10 days later, Jeane indeed received a letter informing her that her grandfather had passed away. Her mother, grieving, realized that it was indeed a letter with a black border. At that moment, she sensed that her little daughter was not an ordinary person. Jeane's mother took her to a gypsy fortune-teller, and the fortune-teller's words confirmed her suspicions. The fortune-teller examined Jeane's hand and said, "I have never seen palm lines like these before. This child has the ability to predict world changes. God has bestowed upon her the gift of prophecy." The fortune-teller gave Jeane a crystal ball as a gift. And the little girl was delighted because she could see various images inside the crystal ball, and the images she saw always came true. She thought everyone had this ability. Over time, Jeane's prophetic abilities spread far and wide. One day, an actress named Marie Dressler came to see her. Marie Dressler was a stage actress with a meager salary. She wanted to open a small boarding house to support herself but was reluctant to give up acting, which was her dream and passion. She wanted to know which path she should choose. At the age of 9, little Jeane looked into the crystal ball and saw dazzling fireworks and countless amounts of money. She then told the actress, "You will become a big star and have a lot of money." Marie Dressler, upon hearing Jeane's words, made up her mind to pursue acting. She later became a highly acclaimed stage actress. She often said to people, "If it weren't for little Jeane telling me those words, I might have given up on the stage long ago." More than 10 years later, Marie Dressler won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in the film Min and Bill. When someone asked Jeane where her ability to foresee the future came from, she, being a devout Catholic, confidently answered that it was a gift from God. Sometimes she saw future images in the crystal ball, other times during meditation, and sometimes through flashes of insight during interactions with others. At the age of 21, Jeane got married, and she and her husband settled in Washington. Jeane started writing astrology columns for newspapers, and her name became well known in Washington's political circles. On a clear morning in November 1944, Jeane received a phone call from the White House. The voice on the other end said, "The president wants to see you." As Jean walked into the White House and shook hands with President Roosevelt, she felt the weight of the world's burden on his shoulders. A sense of loneliness washed over her. And Roosevelt wasted no time in asking, "How much time do you think I have left to fulfill my duties?" Jean stared at the president for a moment but answered honestly, "Perhaps 6 months, maybe even less." The room fell silent. Roosevelt was skeptical. By the following April, less than 6 months from the meeting between the president and Jean, Roosevelt passed away in Georgia due to a cerebral hemorrhage. Jean, like most ordinary women, had no interest in politics or the world's patterns. However, she had predicted countless international events, including Churchill's resignation and re-election, the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947, Gandhi's assassination, and Khrushchev's downfall. Throughout the 1940s, Jean's astrology columns were syndicated in over 300 newspapers across the United States. People would flock to her, seeking guidance and wisdom. The influx of visitors disrupted her family life, making it impossible to receive everyone at home. As a result, her husband, Mr. Dixon, set up an office for Jean in his own company. Every day, piles of letters seeking help would arrive like snowflakes. While most of Jean's predictions came true, there were times when she missed the mark. For instance, she once predicted that by 1967, cancer would be as easily treatable as a common cold, but that did not come to pass. She also predicted a war in 1958, which never occurred. Additionally, there was a time when someone asked for her help in finding a missing child, but the child was never found. Jean held deep respect for historical prophets, but she disagreed with people interpreting Nostradamus' prophecies to claim that the world would end in 1999. Instead, she believed that the true crisis would come in 2020. This brings us to the crucial topic of doomsday. This is what she said. The great final battle would come in 2020, where false prophets, Satan, and Antichrist figures would rise to wage war against humanity. Now, half of 2024 has already passed, and there are no signs of such a war. Many people look back at this prophecy and believe that Jean was playing a big joke on the world or that she was never a true prophet to begin with. In prophecies, the term, Great Final Battle, generally refers to the end of the world or a major crisis for humanity. However, upon careful examination of Jean's writings, it is possible that her interpretation of the Great Final Battle had a different meaning, as she goes on to discuss false prophets. Satan and Antichrist are indeed religious terms, so the Great Final Battle mentioned here may refer to a conflict that occurs on a spiritual level in another dimension, rather than a conventional war with missiles and mushroom clouds. It is possible that Jean's interpretation of the Great Final Battle could be linked to the global COVID-19 pandemic that occurred in 2020. If we understand the battle as the pandemic, then Jean may not have been mistaken. Regardless of what this battle refers to, how can humanity overcome this crisis? The answer lies in another book she wrote called The Call to Glory. In this book, she wrote a prophecy describing an experience she had in the 1960s. She said that one day, she overslept and woke up to a scene outside her window that was completely different from the familiar sight of bare trees and streets. Instead, she saw a barren desert under a vibrant blue sky. Above the horizon, the sun was radiating brilliant light. Emerging from the radiant sunlight were a pharaoh and his queen, Nefertiti, holding hands. Jean mentioned seeing the queen holding a baby in her other arm. The baby was dressed in tattered clothes, contrasting sharply with the attire of the king and queen. However, the baby's eyes were filled with wisdom and knowledge. At this point, the pharaoh and the queen approached Jean and handed her the child, as if entrusting the child to the entire world. Suddenly, the child started emitting a radiant light that merged with the sunlight. The queen walked away and stopped in front of a large brown water jug. As she bent down to drink from her cupped hands, a dagger was plunged into her back. When Jean turned her head to look at the child again, something strange happened. The child had transformed into an adult. A small cross on his head began to grow larger, dripping dew in all directions onto the earth. People of different ethnicities, faiths, and skin colors knelt around him with their arms raised in worship. Jean said that this vision was different from any she had experienced before. She felt as though she was actually there, kneeling alongside the people in worship. Then, the room grew dark, and the vision disappeared, but Jean remained immersed in the experience. What does all of this mean? Jean believed she had found the answer. She explained that a child would be born in the East, and he would completely change the world. By the end of this century, he would unite all of humanity under the creed of mutual love. It would be the establishment of a new religious world. He would spread God's wisdom among people, merging every sect and doctrine together. As for the identity of this person from the East, Jean explained that although he would come from a humble family, she firmly believed that he was a descendant of Queen Nefertiti and the pharaoh. It is important to mention that Nefertiti was the wife of the famous pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten is known for unifying the ancient Egyptian polytheistic worship into the worship of the supreme deity Aten, while not denying the existence of other gods. He appears in Jean's vision and entrusts a child to continue the task of merging different beliefs. Therefore, the vision Jean witnessed and the message conveyed are consistent. In the Western context, the term East has two layers of meaning. Geographically, the East refers to everything east of Eastern Europe, including the northeastern corner of Africa. It can be further divided into the Near East, Middle East, and Far East based on proximity to Europe. Culturally, the East refers to ancient civilizations outside the Christian cultural sphere, generally referring to ancient India or the Chinese cultural sphere. Jean understands that this person from the East might influence the world in a completely new way. The world will enter a new era without war or disasters, taking on a new form and appearance. All the stories about Jean Dixon mentioned today can be found at the Jean Dixon Museum in Virginia. Jean wrote in her book that the hope of humanity lies in the East, shining from the East to the West, and that God will come again. In 1997, Jean passed away at the age of 93, without having the opportunity to witness the most significant part of her prophecy, and no one can ask her further questions. As for today, do we have the chance to witness the prophesied decisive battle and the most important figure? Today's topic ends here. Thank you all for watching.